on Chestnut Street. It was one of those crappy little, it was about the size of this room, so not one of those big ones. And the screen was like not much bigger than this. And it was so weird, such a weird, because that was in the 60s. But I saw it with two friends from college. We went and saw it. Very gross, very weird movie. But during part of the Roman period, especially during Nero's time, Epicureanism was the fad, really, among a lot of the wealthy. But instead of following his actual principles, they instead took it to extremes and wanted to basically just have fun all the time. So that's when the Romans, the wealthy Romans, had extravagant parties. They were eating all the time, basically trying to figure out some way to physically have pleasure all the time. And that's not at all what Epicurus was trying to teach. His was really a sane kind of practical life, as that was happy, but the kind of happy life that you could imagine people really would be happy. This sounds sick, when you think of the kind of constant attempt to be enjoying yourself and everything. So Epicureanism, as I mentioned, that a lot of restaurants advertise that they have Epicurean menus and things. It's more like the Roman sickness interpretation of it than the real attempt to live an Epicurean life. But so if you think, as we're coming across here, as we're coming across here, so on this side you have no interest in the community. Here you have moderate interest in the community. Right? Then coming still further over, we end up with the Stoics. We have some interesting examples of the Stoics. Epictetus is one. Trying to think that we have examples that we will look at in our syllabus. I guess I don't have them listed there. So let me show. Epictetus is an example. It's also interesting that he was a Greek who was captured by the Romans and became a slave. So he was a slave for the Romans, but he was an educated slave and worked for the council for Nero. So in some sense, he was kind of one of the ones in charge of a lot of things in Rome. But at the same time, eventually he would be freed, and that's when he would start his own school. But it's the Stoic school, and the Stoics are named that because of the painted porch. So when you look at So the word Stoic doesn't mean someone who's enduring pain or hardship, but it means the porch. So that's where you have all those pillars out on the front where the steps come up. So that's the porch. That's the Stoa, all of that. And the Stoics got their name because Zeno would teach on this porch, right? So the school came to be known as the Stoic, right? The porch. But when you look at the examples of the Stoics, Epictetus, the first one I showed up here, was a slave. Another of the great Stoics was Marcus Aurelius. And notice that he was an emperor. In fact, if you've seen the movie Gladiator, it's not too long ago, the person who played him in the movie was the British actor that played Dumbledore, actually. Do you remember the actor that played Dumbledore in the first three movies? First three movies? No, first two movies. Richard Harris.
Yes,
Richard Harris. So in the movie Gladiator, Richard Harris played Marcus Aurelius. Remember, he was killed by his son Commodus in the movie. I don't think that really happened in real life, just in the movie. But in any case, Marcus Aurelius was an emperor and a Stoic philosopher. And what some of his contemporaries said of him was if he was more of a philosopher and less of an emperor, he would have probably been a good philosopher. And if he had been more of an emperor and less of a philosopher, he probably would have been a good emperor. But as it was, he was terrible at both. Well, I don't know. Is this? Yes, it's working. So, I don't know. But his memoirs, his writings are good Stoic examples. So what happens with the Stoic when you come over this way? You end up with a philosophy that now is primarily involved with the duty that the individual has to the state. So if we go back and think about Aristotle and his arguments that flourishing is the main goal of life, and that means basically being happy, but there's lots of variations on how you can be happy. That's a problem that Aristotle, in a sense, leaves to everyone. You know, being happy is, the goal of life. Well, but how? Right? For Aristotle, it's having everything you need so that you can basically study philosophy. In other words, live like Aristotle, because he liked his life and he thought everyone should live that way. That's kind of Aristotle, right? But everyone since is basically saying, oh no, being happy, well, the heck with everybody, right? The heck with just most everybody, right? But the Stoics know from Aristotle's philosophy that in order to lead a good life, you have to grow up in a good family that cares for you and gives you all the proper nutrition, the proper love and affection, the proper education, the proper this, that, an iPhone, all the things you need, in order to be a happy person, right? An iPhone with, unlimited, hours, et cetera. That's absolute necessity for a young person to live a flourishing life, and of course, Aristotle's iPhones were not nearly as good as ours today. But, chisels. So the Stoics pick up on an aspect of Aristotle's philosophy that says you have to have a good community for you to have a good family. I mean, you can have a good family and everyone else takes it. I think of poor Ta-Nehisi Coates, growing up in a family that they were educated people, but they're living in a slum in Baltimore. fighting like crazy to try to have a good environment for their kids. And boy, they succeeded like gangbusters, because he was the only one, Ta-Nehisi, that grew up, that went to college and dropped out. He went to Howard University for 2 years, but then dropped out to become a writer, and ended up writing for The Atlantic, and now he's written 3 books, I think, that are bestsellers, plus he just finished writing the script for a small movie called The Black Panther. So he seems to have confounded himself, because all along his writing has all been about how horrible it is the way society has treated black people, and there's no way black people can make ends meet and get a good education, etc., when we're prejudiced so much. And dang, now he's a millionaire. Shoot, that kind of screws his whole argument, doesn't it? But all of his siblings from that same family got their college educations and are professional people. And they grew up in the Baltimore slum. But that's really unusual. I think he's right, actually, in a lot of his complaints about the situation. That, if you're growing up in that kind of environment, it's really difficult to not be he was a member of a gang, had to be. Otherwise, he'd have been shot. So he had to be on a side. Otherwise, there's no one to protect him, etc. His dad having to go to work with, I think, a gun in order to make sure he safely got places. Leaving at like 5 in the morning, to avoid, all the gangs showing up, etc. Obviously, it's easier to raise a good family if you live in a good community. You're surrounded by people you can trust. And, I love, I read this kind of stuff and I think, wow, this is why I'm here. I occasionally leave the door unlocked. Uh-oh, I shouldn't have said that. And mostly because the darn thing freezes in such a way that, if we lock it, it's like, you can't get it open. So we leave it unlocked when it's that cold. But we have an inner door, Arctic entranceway, and we lock that one, right? And, the only thing they're going to find in my garage if they break in is books. And please take them. It's very difficult to throw them out yourself when you keep looking at them and thinking, oh, I really ought to read more of Mary Beard's tome, but it's getting hard for me to carry it anymore because I'm getting older. You need a hand cart.
One that the wheels hasn't been squared off on.
Yeah, no, you don't want those. But so the Stoics' job is that good community. You cannot have the good community unless some people do their duty to the community. And so the main job of the Stoic is to do the duty to the community, and yet at the same time experience personal happiness. So the question then comes, how do you do that? And this is where the Stoics invent a marvelous way of doing both, standing there doing your duty and at the same time avoiding the stress that goes with doing that. And that's internal self-control of your thoughts. That's where you get that stoic, he's got a stoic countenance. He's suffering from, all sorts of crazy things going on around, but nothing seems to bother him. Why? Because internally, he's controlling his pain. He's controlling his stress. Because you can change your stress therapeutically by just focusing on something that's less stressful. That's actually a fairly common tact that we use today. I think of so many different occasions where this has come in handy. Basic training, where your drill sergeant's looking you right in the face, saying, "You're lower than whale shit at the bottom of the ocean, recruit," etc. And, you know, a lot of the kids, you know, in the ranks are like, oh, I want to go home to my mommy. You know, big guys, you know, they're in tears because this little ugly drill sergeant's, and they want to go somewhere else.
My biggest trouble is not rolling my eyes.
It was hilarious, wasn't it? Yeah, but you can't laugh. You know, this, you know, yes, drill sergeant, you know, get down and knock him out until I'm tired, you know. It's an act. You're playing a game, but inside your mind, what's happening to you is not happening to you. You're watching it, you know, happen to your body, but you're protected from what's going on. A perfect example of someone doing this is Victor.
We're going to meet Viktor Frankl, the internationally famous psychiatrist, writer, and lecturer. He deals with the most common ailment of our time, meaninglessness.
Certainly nobody of us is spared suffering at one time or another. But everybody, in the midst of suffering, is given a chance to bear testimony of the human potential at its best, which is to turn a personal tragedy into a human triumph.
Dr. Frankl, what is meant by logotherapy?
Therapy means healing, and logos means meaning. Thus, logotherapy is really healing through meaning, although this, of course, is an oversimplification.
The lesson one could learn in Auschwitz and in other concentration camps in the final analysis was those who were oriented toward a meaning to be fulfilled by them in the future were most likely to survive.
Is a finite freedom, a limited freedom. That is to say, a human being is never fully free from conditions, be they of biological or psychological or sociological kind. But the ultimate freedom is always and remains always reserved to ourselves. That is the freedom to take a stand to whatever conditions might confront us. How we react to the unchangeable conditions is up to ourselves. In other words, if we cannot change the situation, we have always the last freedom to change our attitude to that situation.
So there's lots of different ways you could refer to this, kind of a internal escape from things, thinking about something else, but meaning too. So I think, you know, the classic situation of the two guys in a foxhole, you know, the one, you know, is scared to death, you know, thinks it's absolutely stupid that we're here, you know, the enemy has all these tanks and, you know, I'm down to throwing ice cream. You know, that's all I have left because I've fired all my ammunition and we're freezing and blitzkrieg, you know, whatever, you know, so I'm just like flinging dirt, you know, it's ridiculous. We're going to be killed. I'm out, you know, is scared to death, hopeless case, right? The other guy, same exact situation, but as far as he's concerned, we're the last barrier between, you know, the Nazis and, you know, the free world, you know, so we've got to do everything we possibly can in order to keep them from getting past our position, right? So that guy is going to continue to hold out, even if it does, of course, mean that he's going to be killed. He's prepared, as the Marines usually say, to embrace the suck, right? You've ever heard that expression, embrace the suck? You know, so, you know, it's absolutely miserable, and you just enjoy it, right? Yeah, you know, that's the Stoic attitude. So the Stoics are trying to have flourishing. They realize that that means somebody has to do the police work, somebody has to sit at the board meetings, somebody has to do all the miserable suffering that enables the community to function. And only then will you have the kind of community that will enable families to flourish, etc. So that's part of the Stoic. So the main thing for the Stoic is duty. Is that fun? I've lost it again. I don't know where I put it again.
It's over here
No
On the-
kidding.
on the table.
What did I do?
And you have it just standing up.
It's not putting it anyplace. Everywhere. I'm trying every place. So, no, this is a different one. Crap. It's got to be one of those. So skeptics.
Behind the green one there?
I've got them over here. I brought it over here with me. I'm piling them up over here. There's two. So the next one is skeptic. I'll go with skepticism. And by the way, in Britain, I believe it's spelled with a C instead of a K. That confuses you. You probably read a lot of text where it's written with a C. There's no real right way, I suppose. But the whole point of a skeptic is when you're dealing with the philosophical question about how to have the good life, it's very stressful trying to just figure out the philosophical question associated with that. Well, for them, the way of avoiding stress is to realize that we can't know the answer to this. The right decision is to stop worrying about it, and just live life, basically, according to the kind of community values you have. I think of people that, like when they were kids, they were taken to church by their parents. Then they go to college, they take classes and feel like, oh, religion was dumb. And they end up dating, find someone to love, they fall in love, they get married maybe, or cohabit or something, they have children. They end up with children. As the children get old enough, they realize, you know what? We ought to take them to church. Not because they believe in the church, but because they believe that going to church is good for the child. Do you know what I mean? Right? That the child needs to grow up and have morals, and where are you going to get that but at church? And the only way you could do it, I'm not going to teach them morals. Gosh, I don't want them to believe what I do. I want them to be good people, right? Yeah. So what do? You take them to somebody who you think will teach them to be good. So you take them to church, but you can't just like drop them off at the door. Right?
It's a Sunday school.
Well, yeah, it's in, so what happens is you've got to take them there, and while they're down getting their, religious education, you've got to be upstairs with all the other adults, acting like you're a believer, right? So they pretend they like the stuff, they mouth all the prayers, they sing all the songs, even though they probably hate them. They bring the lunch when it's their job, they donate, all that kind of stuff. But as a matter of fact, if you ask them about their beliefs, oh, I don't believe any of that stuff. But doing it because they want to be part of the community, they want their kids to grow up and so on. But they themselves, not really worried about whether Jesus was a man or God, or whether Allah is, the only God, or any of those kinds of arguments. They're just going to that church because it's convenient, or they like the people, they're, there's all kinds of answers of why they're going to this particular church. That's kind of an American thing, really. People kind of shop, for the kind of particular church that they would like to attend based on a lot of different, I know these people, they're good people, this will be okay. I think a lot of what they believe is weird, strange, but who the heck, believes that stuff? But, we pay this guy, he shows up, he says this stuff, okay, thanks. Meanwhile, they're getting their kids a moral upbringing, and they feel good about that. Plus, by the way, Charles Murray points out that the 4 things that make a community a successful one, working industriously, being honest, being married, and raising the children, and staying married, right? And going to church. And as far as he's concerned, it doesn't matter what church. What's important about it is that it connects you to the community. It's your turn to bring, the pasta or something, and help sweep the parking lot, or have your kids in the school, in the play or something. Now, be connected to the community through all these things, because then you have your position in society. You're expected to be there. People are dependent on you. That gives you a sense of status, etc. All that stuff is important. Skeptics do that too. They're just not worried about all of the theological stuff. They're not going to pick the church that they go to based on the nuances of a theological creed and so on. But being skeptical doesn't mean that they're not participating. They're just not worried about that stuff, right? So that's the skeptics. And then we have the Neoplatonists. Neoplatonism. And that is essentially the one that will win. And an example that we use for the most part is Plotinus. In fact, we have a piece of Plotinus in the text. Plotinus was actually associated with a Christian teacher for a while, Ammonius Saccas. Let's see if I can find. So he was in Alexandria. Let's just go to Plotinus here. So Ammonius Saccas was his teacher, and Ammonius Saccas was a Christian as far as I recall. I don't see that clearly here. Maybe if you flick to this. Are you reading this?
Yeah, it says later Christian writers stated they used Christian.
Huh, that's interesting. So that's news to me. 'Cause I was always made aware of that connection. But that doesn't mean that Plotinus was a Christian. But notice that Christianity is available, it's around at the time. Well, Plotinus is a Neoplatonist, which means he's a follower of Plato with some nuances. He's a new version of Plato. And the main difference, briefly, is that Plotinus believed that there really was a physical connection between the ideal world and here. So for Plotinus, we have what's called the emanation theory. He still uses the sun as the metaphor. Remember, Plato loves the concept of the sun as the concept of the good. For Plotinus, the good really does kind of emanate in some sort of physical sense. And a perfect example of how this works would be with the concept of beauty. That when something is beautiful, like your face, for example, it's bilaterally symmetrical, your eyes, you know, everything is, you know, we can measure it, and we say, oh, this is perfectly arranged, etc. It's got the I can't, you know, your face is as ugly as mine, actually.
Well, oh, starting to sink.
Yeah, well, you know, I just don't want to get into a sexist thing
Along
here,
with my
you know, where, but you get the idea, right? You know, that, you know, well, I mean, we could, haven't we
There's an
talked about?
argument to that too, that people with perfectly symmetrical features aren't really that good looking.
They need at least one blemish to make it more interesting. Well, this is, didn't we talk about this already? The golden ratio?
Yeah.
Faces. I don't know who we get to pick. I wonder if Michelle Obama's up there. As, you know, which face? Have you ever seen the Dove commercial? Where the face is completely redone and then they change it? Yes?
I think so.
That's Dove Evolution, I think it's called. She's pretty. If I do say so myself, I'm allowed to, I think. I have to put like a trigger warning. Teacher's about to say something that might irritate. So all this, I think, is something that you could really do to a person, right? But now notice we're photoshopping her, so this is not real. Notice it's a gated, nice neighborhood too. I always show this one too, when I show that one. You see this one? Yes? It looks pretty decent. But this is Slav evolution. Come in and punch him on the cheek. Sorry. Just crazy. But what Plotinus thought was that if something is beautiful in the physical world, it's participating in a physical way in the order that makes it beautiful, the order that's emanating from the good that does that. And that order is primarily mathematical. And he was very much into mathematics. He was that's Plato and Plato's philosophy, the mathematicians really gravitate to, not only because it argues that the abstractions are the reality, but I mean, even today we would argue that mathematics kind of rules science, and everything can be depicted kind of in mathematical terms. Everything's an algorithm, everything's got sets, mathematical sets, and so on. But, you know, the order behind it all is mathematical, and that comes from true beauty in a mathematical sense. And by the way, he was into the nines. So his main work is called the Aeneas. It's right here. So the Aeneas, right? And there's 6 of them, but each of them is 9, full of 9 aspects. So altogether, they're the 9s. Notice there's 9 bullet comments on what they're all about. What is the living being, and what is man on virtue and dialectic, true happiness? So this is the version of Plato that basically becomes the dominant philosophy of the period. So if we try to figure out who, especially among the Romans, because the Romans take over, who becomes the philosophers, and you know, which philosophies dominate in the empire, it's not the Cynics necessarily, although there are some. Interestingly, it could be something that we see in the empire in people like John the Baptist, and maybe even Jesus, if you think of it that way. Epicurus, well, you actually had to be pretty wealthy to kind of live off the grid and still have all the happy things that you could have in the life.
Well, a balance of both.
And be protected. Pardon?
Have a balance of both.
Yeah.
Because if you can eliminate one drain, you create more opportunities for other points of happiness.
Well, and obviously you could blend this stuff. I mean, you could have a house in the city and then retreat to your villa along the coast. Cicero did that. Right? We definitely call Cicero a Stoic, but at the same time, where did he die? You know, he fled down to his villa and he was trying to escape from there when, the military got him. Because of course he was involved in the assassination of Julius Caesar, right? Doing his duty to protect the Republic against Tyrannus, sic semper Tyrannus, right? Which is also what Wilkes Booth said as he, shot Lincoln. But also between the Platonists, the Neoplatonists, and the Stoics, there's a lot in common. So when we look at the Christians, that essentially then will become the inheritors and take over, we're really looking at the Platonists. I lost how to spell it, and the Stoics, right? So the two of them really kind of merge together in the new religion, and you can see this philosophy, because as we look at the Christians that are are going to develop now, they have to have a philosophy that explains the way the universe is, because the teachings of Jesus basically come in and are how to live, right? You know, so the same kind of sayings that we see with like Epicurus and some of the Stoics, the little principles of life and everything, right? You know, turn the other cheek, you know, all that kind of stuff. You know, these are principles of how to lead the good life. But at the same time, the world that's understood to be part of is going to be understood as a Platonic view. So Plotinus is going to be very important that way. But at the same time, you'll notice a lot of them have the Stoic attitude towards stuff. So the Stoics are going to be part of that too. But you don't see Epicurus as part of this. That seems definitely out. Christians seem pretty horrified by that kind of thing. So I think part of what I intended to do this evening was to include a little bit of Christianity. I don't know that we're going to do more than that. I did play more of Mary Beard, but boy, you ought to listen to Mary Beard too. Maybe we'll listen to more of her. We'll listen to her portion of that debate next time. Yeah, so we're going to look next class. Oh, we do have some more. So that's good. We'll do that. But next class we'll do more. And so I need another
Quiz, please.
So, who do you think is a perfect 10? Is there such a thing? Is anybody a perfect 10? There's a movie, you know, about this.
Yeah, I think I've seen that.
Actually, what was the name of the movie? Perfect 10? 10?
I don't remember. That was so
Oh,
long
Derek.
ago. Yeah, Bo Derek.
It was called 10?
George Weber is a successful songwriter. Elevator music. I'm very big in elevators. And everything is going his way.